Hi, hello, and welcome to the Hash. It's a great day to be talking about crypto news. We've got a lot going on. I'm Zach. We've got Naomi, Will, Jen, and David are here today. Leading us off,
Hello.
Naomi, take it away.
All right, so some big news coming out of the European Union. So, the European Parliament just approved basically what amounts to a mass surveillance of private communications bill. So, they've cloaked it as governments always do in, we're protecting children and all of this. But essentially, what this boils down to is that companies will be able to scan private contents of emails, messages, and all of that. And then there's speculation that come September, they're going to be revising this even further, and then applications that don't have access to messages may be required to put in backdoors. And this is interesting coming out of the EU. It is a divergence from their GDPR policies that they've had, where they've had a pretty good stance on privacy, and this sort of rolls back some of that stuff. Apparently, this stuff was all enabled up until like the end of 2020, and then something sunsetted, and companies could no longer do this. So they basically putting through this bill in order to reinstate this ability for companies. And it's not unlike some bills in Congress in America at the moment. We have the Earn It bill, which is basically mimics this bill in its entirety, and also the Lawful Access to Encrypted Data Act. So much going on here with regards to mass surveillance and the right to privacy and all of that. I'm going to throw this to the group, then maybe we can dig into some of the details of the bill. Just your thoughts on the direction that we're going in. Total financial surveillance, total communication surveillance. It's getting to become this very uncomfortable situation. Will, I'm going to throw this to you first. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, totally agree with you. There's just some bills that have been kind of put out over the last year, which are pretty startling. And then I think a lot of this just kind of comes out of the pandemic, where it's just a totally different political landscape than it was a year and a half ago. A lot of political mentalities have been changed. And now we're seeing some of that come to the forefront with bills in front of these government groups. So in terms of like crypto and Bitcoin and all that stuff, like I'm just thankful that there is strong encryption that does exist, and that there is strong encryption for messaging applications. So Signal, Telegram, things like that. It is interesting to kind of pair that idea that strong encryption does exist, especially for messaging, with something like WhatsApp, which bowed to pressure to kind of change its backdoor ecosystem, or at least they changed it just to be able to gather more revenue for the platform itself, for Facebook. So there's always like this give and take and this balance. And I mean, I guess just to kind of reiterate, thankful for Telegram, thankful for Signal and other applications like that. But interested to hear David's thoughts on this.
Yeah, I guess I first have a question. I don't know if we have any experts here who can speak to it, but I'm curious if anybody has any insight into how this European law actually interacts with local law. I'm not clear on the level of sort of authority that the European Congress has over, let's say, France's national policy. I don't know if anybody has any insight there.
I mean, I can try.
Yeah.
Well, this bill is more sort of permissive rather than a directive. So it basically says that companies have the right to now scan through emails, and it's not until September that they plan to revise this and perhaps add in other things, because they received some initial pushback. But again, I'm not sure how that's going to clash with local laws that maybe don't permit this sort of thing. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be the same sort of situation as America, where you have federal law and state law. And yes, you have some divergence. You have states that are legalizing marijuana, but at the end of the day, you have the DOJ that can come in and shut businesses down, and they just wield a lot of power. So there will probably be a lot of places that will be hesitant to push back against a directive coming from Europe.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would definitely echo Will's point that, or slightly enhance Will's point to say that this definitely pushes more people towards truly encrypted communication, and hopefully drives awareness about the existence of those tools. And I think it also emphasizes something that has always been true, which is, outside of a few exceptions, never assume that anything you put on the internet is going to be private. And that's just a security mandate, which we'll talk more about cybersecurity in a minute. But I think that the real cost here, maybe the biggest downside of this sort of approach is, I hope it's not too controversial to say that law enforcement officials are just as lazy as any other human being, and the tendency here would be to rely on surveillance rather than actual investigation and law enforcement of really serious crimes like child abuse. If you get this system set up where, oh, we're just keeping an eye on everything, then you're not actually looking at the crimes. And so that's my main concern here. Obviously, privacy is the overarching concern, but if you just have this default where law enforcement wants the right to look at everything and that's its answer to crime instead of actually investigating crime, I think that the fallout from that is way bigger than just privacy. It means less enforcement.
Absolutely. And just as we wrap up, Jen, I saw your hand go up. So if you wanted to provide some final comments there.
Yeah, this story made me think. I don't know if any of you guys have ever thought, like, one day when I die and all of my loved ones get access to all of my messages and phone, what are they going to think of me? Like, are they going to have this weird window into my soul? And now the government wants that. And it just feels very weird. I don't know. But I've said so many times on this show that I think it's going to take governments to propose these bills and these laws to really force people to understand what's going on. I've often said that I think people will always choose convenience over privacy. But when we see things like this happening in various parts all over the world, I think it's really going to force people to take a second look at how they're giving away their data and look at the apps that Will has been talking about and Naomi that you've spoken about throughout the show.
Yeah, I'll just add to so up there, I'm not quite as optimistic as you. The reason why they couch it in terms of like we're protecting children is to really squash dissent in Parliament. So, you know, you're not going to have someone push back and say, well, I don't want to protect children. So by using these very triggering and emotionally charged terms, they really do stop discussions about the most effective programs for actually targeting criminals and instead just pass.
That's why we have shows like this
laws.
one.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Right.
But let's change track now. We've got other things to cover on here. Who is next? I believe Zack. You got some things for us.
I've got some things. It's about ransomware. The ransomware, man, it's getting bad out there. A lot of ransomware, a lot of bad hackers taking data, then demanding payment for it. And as such, President Joe Biden is getting increased pressure to present a national strategy to counteract the effects of ransomware. Really interesting because we all know how cryptocurrencies, specifically Bitcoin, also play in the ransomware conversation. And I'm really curious to ask this panel if we think that Bitcoin and crypto will be collateral damage here as we talk about ways to solve the ransomware problem. Jen, I'm going to throw this to you to start off. A couple of interesting nuggets in this Washington Post report that we're talking about that I want to get to later. But talk to me about sort of ransomware and some of the bad narrative repercussions around cryptocurrency that ransomware presents for the industry. What's your take? Are we going to see we're going to see the baby be thrown out with the bathwater on this one, or what?
I think Bitcoin's an easy target. I was reading the story and I thought, well, there we go. I mean, Biden needs to do something. Bitcoin is an easy target. There's a lot that has been done, but obviously we're not seeing ransomware go anywhere. And this narrative, I know we've spoken about the opinion piece. I believe it was in the Wall Street Journal. And I've asked a bunch of experts in the field about that piece. I was speaking to a lawyer in Canada recently who deals with cybersecurity and has dealt with a lot of these ransomware attacks that have demanded cryptocurrency. And it was interesting because he said every single case that he's dealt with involved crypto. So we have these experts in the field who are supporting the narrative. So unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be good times ahead for crypto, especially as governments start to crack down on ransomware.
Gotcha. I wanted to read this one little nugget in this story that I thought was buried, but is really interesting for our audience. So talking about Colonial Pipeline, which a large portion of that ransom was returned by way of the FBI's ability to seize a private key. And there's this interesting quote from one person who is speaking on the condition of anonymity, saying that the way they found that key was not the result of a sophisticated operation or an informant, and it's not easy to replicate. It's not like a trick that works every time, this person was quoted as saying. So I thought that was really interesting as we get a little more details on how the feds are tracking Bitcoin associated with ransomware. David, I kind of cut you off there. I hope that has something to do with what you're going to say next. Take the baton, sir.
So Jen, I've been doing some talking to people about this as well, and I think it's true and accurate that a lot of these, if not most of, if not all of them, involve cryptocurrency. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that attacking cryptocurrency is the answer. The most sophisticated solution to this is actually very simple, which is to make paying ransom illegal. This is how it works in kidnapping cases. For example, in the United States, it's illegal to pay a kidnapping ransom. And the idea there is that by making it illegal to pay those ransoms, you ultimately reduce the incentive for the attack. In the case of the cybersecurity situation, you also make it much more imperative on people to actually do a good job on their own cybersecurity. So I've spoken to several people who have looked deeply at the issue, and really that is the consistent message that I'm getting, is that that's the policy that needs to be implemented, is that paying the ransom itself needs to be illegal. And so the cryptocurrency, if you're actually addressing the issue, is far to the side. Naomi wanted to chime in.
Think that the incentive for people to up their security would be present regardless of whether or not it was illegal to pay the ransomware, because either they have to pay millions and millions of dollars, which is a disincentive to have an insecure system, or it's illegal. Both things are disincentivizing people from having lax security, yet here we are. I'm not sure I agree that making it illegal to pay ransomware is going to help, because it may have long-term benefits, but the people in the moment get crushed. And I always hate to see any laws that restrict how someone can spend their own money if they want to pay a bribe or whatever. I think it should be up to the person. But I do agree that definitely upping security ultimately is going to be the real fix of this. And it doesn't help that the government's persistent narrative when it comes to encryption is always, how do we weaken it? How do we get access to these things? How do we put in backdoors? And meanwhile, we have this, terrible situation going where there's so much ransomware happening because people have these backdoors. People have these insecure systems. They're not thinking about creating robust security. And so I think we need to really start to direct the narrative towards OPSEC and teaching people how to have better security, rather than saying, well, it's okay if some people have access, it's okay, or the government will protect us. That's clearly not going to help here. And the government maybe even will go down David's route and actually harm you by making these things illegal to pay. So, I just think that individuals really need to step up and start protecting themselves.
Yeah, I'll add my 2 cents there. I think it'd be super fun to be a fly on a wall in these conversations in the White House right now on Bitcoin.
100%.
I would just love to see what they're saying. That'd be some journalism right there. But that's my only
one last thing.
My little add-in for the conversation.
One last thing, just to sort of broaden the viewpoint, is if you're thinking about cryptocurrency and cybersecurity, one of the really sort of one way to think about the wave that we're going through now is that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency more generally creates a bug bounty program that's worldwide. By making it possible to pay these ransoms, it's incentivizing people to attack systems, which obviously in the short term is bad, but also gives people a motivation to expose the flaws in these systems, which, considering the direction we're going as a society, we might as well have these attacks now rather than 10 years from now. So to put a, probably a little bit too easy positive gloss on all these hacks, at least we're learning from them.
Thank you for that, David. Way to broaden it out. That's good stuff. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to look again globally. A lot of things happening globally. We have a China tech crackdown that's sort of expanding its reach and has some interesting implications. We also have Binance CEO CZ responding to global warnings from a slate of regulators. We will talk about that after the break. Stick with us. It's The Hash.
From fueling local economies to connecting global markets, the future of money is taking shape now. Crypto State by CoinDesk will bridge communities of crypto investors, thought leaders, and developers from around the world. Together, we will tell the global story of decentralized finance. Join us for this virtual event series as we stop in Nigeria to dive into the movements that are disrupting markets and changing communities. Register today.
Welcome back. So, news that has taken a slightly complex timeline, but I'll go through it. Didi Chuxing, the Chinese ride-hailing service that's the equivalent to Uber, completed an initial public offering on the New York Stock Exchange last Wednesday. It raised about $4.5 billion. Then on Friday, Chinese authorities decided that they had some concerns about DiDi'S cybersecurity, and not only ordered a major review of the company's cybersecurity practices, but ordered that it be removed from all Chinese app stores. Now, what this highlights is platform risk, which is to say we live in a world where there are a lot of things, whether it's Facebook itself or the Google App Store or Apple App Store, that people use to reach their customers. DiDi is the same as Uber and a lot of other companies that use apps, for example, and you have to be on the App Store to get your app to people because of the way things are set up. And so really any company, theoretically, any tech company or most of them could have something similar happen. Obviously, when this happened, it was very bad news for DiDi on Tuesday, the first full day of trading after the news. The stock was down 25%, which is a lot. And surely those IPO buyers were not happy. So the takeaway here for us is to talk about how do we build a better internet where there are not these gates keeping people from having direct contact with their own customers. Will, you're a big sort of Web3 distributed stuff guy, right? Maybe you can talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, for sure. So in general, the thoughts I had on this conversation was just about like how the capital markets here work. China, just over the last few years, has been looking at like trying to bring in these companies and trying to make them IPO on their own exchanges and trying to hyping up the markets that they have internally and trying to get their own companies to issue the U.S. markets. And to a degree, like crypto has some answers for that. I mean, they're extremely immature still. The ability to like throw your own coin out there or your own security token like is certainly like promising, and in the future I think you could see a lot of companies choosing to do that are more mainstream than just crypto first companies. In terms of like the security implications here, that's interesting that the Chinese government chose that as the rationale for limiting the IPO. Doesn't really seem like the true answer, just like this general notion of insecurity, the app layer. So I don't have many comments there. I mean, in the future Web3 products, they do have the ability to be uncensorable. There's a lot of finality wrapped up in these products when we're talking about like Web3 apps, and that adds more complexity because once a smart contract is live, it's live. So I don't really know if that's an answer either. I think just like going forward though, the capital markets question is certainly interesting and something that Web3 products can address. Naomi, what is your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, just in response to what you said, Will, about like the reasoning for this, and David mentions this in his article, that the government had asked DiDi to halt its IPO, to postpone it, to push it back, and they went ahead with an IPO. And it doesn't surprise me that the government's cracked down. We saw this with Jack Ma when he spoke out against the government, and then was disappeared, and his company essentially, broken up and taken away from him. And so it's, again, I just feel like it's the Chinese government putting their foot down and saying we're in control, do not cross us, and to kind of maintain that image. But in terms of like this Web 3.0 world, we always talk about these gatekeepers, and we talk about how, well, big tech, we've got to break them apart, or, what's the alternative because people don't have choices. I'm just going to push back on that narrative. So if you want to get an app, at the moment, there's something called F-Droid, which is available for Android, which is basically a mirror of the Google Play Store. So if you want something that's open source, that's permissionless, that's available to you, then you can definitely use alternatives out there. It's incumbent upon the app developers, though, to make their apps available in these different stores. So when people say, "Oh, well, my stuff's on YouTube and I was shut down, therefore I have no alternatives," it's like, well, there are lots of alternatives for videos out there. You just chose not to put your videos on the alternatives. The same thing I think applies to apps, and people need to start thinking outside of the box. We're so used to these people who've carefully curated this process for us and making it easy for people on Apple or Android devices to get our apps, and we just think in terms of this binary, and that's really not what the reality of today's market is like. There are definitely alternatives out there. A lot of people, I just went to a conference and I was trying to give people cryptocurrency, actually. I was handing out to attendees and getting people people to download things. There were so many people who were like, is that wallet available on F-Droid? So clearly there is a large demographic of people who are already exploring these alternatives. And I'd highly recommend anyone who cares about privacy to start looking in that direction. But Zach, I think I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. It kind of harkens back to actually EU privacy law a little bit with some of these encrypted messaging services. The technologies are out there, and I think we may see a future of the internet where it's a bunch of small tribes on the internet, right? This era of big platforms and big gatherings on the internet has really caused some repercussions that weren't or could not have been anticipated when these platforms were first spun up. And I think, to Naomi's point, these alternatives are out there, right? They're just not widely known. They're used by these small groups of people who are using them for either ideological convenience or other reasons. And I think it presents an interesting sort of model for what the internet will become, I think, in the next era of building. And I think we have a front row seat in this building process, just being here in cryptocurrency land, right? I mean, I think we could see all these many small communities that exist across the internet, rather than 2, 3, 4 huge ones and all of the downstream side effects that those produce. So that's what I thought of when I thought about sort of this story, and it sort of ties in nicely with some of the other stuff we've been talking about today. So Naomi, thanks for hitting on that for sure. I'll toss it back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add another thing that's a little more optimistic. I'm taking a leaf out of Jen's book and trying to provide an optimistic take here. Thanks for the inspiration, Jen. But right now is a really exciting time to be alive, because we're talking about Chinese crackdowns, and we're talking about the world kind of going to surveillance mode in the European Parliament and the US. And it gets scary when we think of all of the power that these central entities wield. But then when we look at the crypto space, when we look at the decentralized technologies out there and the encryption tools we have, really the tables are being turned, and that could explain why governments are cracking down harder than ever. Power is being distributed back to the people. People are getting control of the money supply again. People are being given the ability to, if they want to host their own server, if they want to, encrypt and to truly end-to-end encrypt their communications, they absolutely can. The technology is there, and the genie is out of the bottle in so many ways right now that it is exciting for people. If people want these tools, they're out there for them. And I highly recommend that people start digging into this stuff, because it is empowering to live in a time where you can control your own destiny, perhaps for the first time in a very long time.
On that point, David, I wanted to just quickly get your take on this. So we've talked about alternative technologies. We've talked about Web3. I think for us, it feels very kind of second nature, but there are a lot of people out there who just can't wrap their heads around this. And we have people who have built businesses on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. I mean, our show is on Twitter and YouTube. David, you talk about Web3. Can you just explain to us very quickly before we move on to the next topic, what a world like this might look like for someone who's created a business online on, let's say, Instagram?
Just a very quick recap for people. Web3 is really more a set of principles than any technology specifically, although it's fairly blockchain centric. It's about openness and people being able to use systems without middlemen primarily. I'm not getting it exactly right off the top of my head. As far as what the world would look like, I really think Zack and Naomi have hit on it in terms of fragmentation. There will be many smaller communities, smaller businesses, hopefully, which actually is a good thing. The downside risk that I'm worried about is, as you said, for a lot of people, this is difficult to wrap their heads around. And so there will be more stratification according to people's savviness and tech knowledge. And ultimately, I think it is disadvantageous for, working people who are not as, fully focused on this as we are, who are going to wind up being more monitored and more surveilled because of this. I think we have one last story, but I'm forgetting whose it is.
Oh, it's me, but I think we got two more.
Two more.
We got two more stories. I got you though.
I'm still learning.
So we're not turning away. We're not moving away from regulation land. We got more of that to come right now. So Binance CEO CZ has likened recent pressure from regulators, which has just been pounding on his door for about the last 60 days, to that of the initial development of the car. So he wrote an open letter Wednesday, to just regulators in general, and then his audience in general, saying that the adoption of cryptocurrencies was going to come with these spout and need for clear regulations across the board. He said in the letter that compliance is a journey, especially in new sectors like crypto. We also recognize that with growth comes complexity and more responsibility. This, of course, comes after Thailand's, basically their equivalent, the SEC, wrote a letter to them, and then also the UK shut down some aspects of Binance operating country. Binance pulled out of Ontario province in Canada. Shout out to Jen. And a few other regulators jumping on them, which has, like, some people think that maybe all these regulators are acting in concert together, which is an interesting idea. Zack, what's your thought on this letter? Do you agree with him? And where do you think the next hammer is going to blow for them? I feel like there's more to come.
Oh, well, my goodness. Everybody in the industry is talking about Binance. It's really quite interesting. It's good to see CZ get out in front of it. I think, to his credit, he has been a showman through it all. And for him to come out with his open letter is notable. I like the car analogy, because the thing that always I come back to is Uber. Remember when Uber just like flouted every law and was like, all these municipal codes about taxis and stuff, those are dumb. We're just going to take over and we're going to make this a bajillion-dollar business. And it worked. That's not the case in the financial sector. And I think we see it a bit more pronounced, whether it's Libra trying to reinvent the stablecoin playbook, whether it's CZ trying to move fast and break things. When it comes to people's finances, there's a whole apparatus of regulatory bodies that will force the brakes to be hit on said car in that analogy. So that to me just stood out as something that was really just an interesting sort of allusion. I think we reported yesterday or today or something that, according to sources with knowledge of the matter, Binance is looking to get, quote, a UK version of Brian Brooks, referring to the former OCC chief who now helms the US affiliate of Binance. So clearly this is a journey, and I think clearly Binance is looking to influence the outcome of that journey as much as possible. But for the much talked about Binance and the much talked about CZ to step up and put this letter out there, I thought was quite notable. As people wonder what is next for this big company. Naomi, I saw your hand up. I'm really curious for your thoughts here.
Yeah, I want to go back to his parallel around automobiles that you mentioned, Zack. So the way he frames it is that there's a parallel because laws and guidelines were developed along the way. But there's also another striking parallel in that early automobile laws were really dumb and people didn't really know what they were talking about, right? There's this famous law that when cars first came out and they could go much faster, and also with trains as well, you used to have people walking in front of the cars with a flag, letting people know that it was coming in. So the car could only go as fast as previous transportation models could go. It seems like such a striking parallel with current industry, because you have an industry that is so tied up with regulation and so slow moving and cumbersome and frictionful, and then you create cryptocurrency that's like, hey guys, let's make this easier, and the regulators are like, oh, let's apply everything that we have in our terrible system to this new quick technology. So I enjoyed that parallel, even though he didn't mention any of these things in his letter. That's immediately what came to mind for me.
For me,
point out one other really interesting thing about this parallel to the auto industry that, take from it what you will. But, it's 100 years since the invention of the automobile. We've come to the regulations that we have. 40,000 people a year still die in auto accidents in the US. So it's an interesting parallel from that perspective, too, in the sense that, maybe you can regulate this stuff, but there's still going to be a lot of things that happen no matter how you regulate it.
Yeah, well, maybe self-driving cars will save all of the deaths, and maybe self-governing organizations like DAOs will take away all of the bad things that happen with crypto and all the bad things that come along with centralization. Maybe there are lots of parallels we could draw there.
Maybe.
But let's change track there. Jen, what have we got? What's going on in the world of credit cards?
All right. So can you guys believe it's July already? Yesterday, we spoke about the first half of the year for NFTs. Billions of dollars were spent. And now Visa's crypto-related cards have seen $1 billion in spending activity for the first 6 months of 2021. So the $1 billion is made up of consumer spending crypto and transactions tied to fiat accounts that resulted in crypto rewards. Zack, I'm going to throw this down to you. What did you take away from the story? What do you think it means for mainstream adoption?
Well, I think that Visa is quite savvy here. Kai Sheffield, who is their head of crypto, he's been in the game for a few years now, and I think they positioned themselves quite interestingly in the space as I think that mainstream broker to the world of crypto finance. I'm not super like bullish on crypto as a spending vehicle, and I think I think you could look at this headline and say, oh, people have spent $1 billion in crypto using their credit cards this year. And that's certainly not the case. So I think, like, to Nate's credit in that piece, we tried to be as clear as possible. But I think Visa remains a company to watch in the crypto space. They're trying to port this stuff over to their rails in really interesting ways. Famously, they got on board the Libra experiment and then bailed on that real quick. But ever since then, they've been trying to figure out new ways to bring crypto to their audiences. And it remains really interesting to watch, right? All these companies are rolling out their crypto debit or credit cards. There's more of these things on the market, so it makes sense that they're accounting for more spending. But again, as to whether or not I really think that a lot of people are going to spend their crypto by way of cards like this, I don't know. I'm a little bit bearish on that, but I know Naomi is more of a believer in using crypto for payment. So I'm going to toss this up to her in case she has any thoughts on this new data from Visa.
Yeah, for sure. But I'll throw to Will first. I saw your hand go up, and then I'll chime in.
Yeah, I saw a nice tweet from Joseph Young, who's just a freelance crypto reporter out there, and he just kind of noted that this is what adoption looks like. You have these intermediary stages where you start with just like the absolute fanatic believers, and then it slowly trickles in, and then you have like the adoption, the middlemen start using it, and then you slowly move to direct payments. And we already see that already, where Aave, which is a really, really popular DeFi lending application, I guess is probably the best way to call it. And they're even looking at issuing their own card where you can put a loan up for cryptocurrency, take out a stablecoin loan, and then use those stablecoins on your own card, on an Aave card, and not through like any payment providers that I know of right now. But to you, Naomi.
Yeah, it's just interesting the way that this adoption is being rolled out, right? Because you see merchant adoption, and that could really be achieved by, if crypto was ubiquitous and you could just pay directly to your coffee store if they just accepted it directly, or they're going to have some sort of a payment vehicle to accept it. And it's hard to get people to diversify and say, okay, well, I have something to process Visa cards, and then a different one to process MasterCards, and then a different one to process Apple Pay. And, you have all of these different methods for people to accept payments. And so what we're starting to see now is a convergence where you're melding crypto into existing payment options, which kind of takes the burden away from merchants so that they don't have to experiment and add more of these different options. It does centralize all of this. So obviously not a fan of just going through centralized players like Visa, but it does sort of give companies gets their feet wet into this world, which is interesting. And maybe we'll see a divergence after that. I know that I've tried to set people up on their tablets. Most people are using a Toast tablet these days. And they've actually just closed, I believe, their system. So you can't add other apps to it. You can't even add shortcuts on the home screen. So it's getting more difficult to actually integrate crypto into these things. So I think we're going to have to keep coming up with more solutions. But Zach, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, so to provide sort of the bullish countertake to my own bearish argument in the beginning, I think the pieces are starting to come together, though, quite interestingly, especially around
the only one intellectually worthy.
Yeah, no. I'm midwit all the way. I'm the midwit on the panel. But no, I think the pieces around USDC and so you could put your USDC in Coinbase and get a 4% return on your USDC, which smokes any other savings vehicle that most people have access to. You could then use those USDC spending on your Coinbase credit card or whatever. And I think suddenly this idea of adoption of crypto payments as a mainstream vehicle sort of becomes, I guess, more clear, more within reach, but we're still very much, I think, distant from that. But I don't know.
Yeah,
and just to put some perspective on the thing that Zach was saying about volume, total annual Visa volume is $8.8 trillion. So I'm not going to do the math, but $1 billion is nothing compared to that.
It's still something.
It's still early.
Well,
we're still early, guys.
We're
still early. We're early, guys. We're still early. All right. Well, thanks for sticking with us on the hash today. we're going to leave this here. We're going to talk about more stuff tomorrow on Thursday. This has been Wednesday. It's been good. I'm Zack Seward, Naomi Brockwell, Will Foxley, David Z. Morris, Jen Sanasie. Those are your lovely co-hosts of The Hash. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Stick around, 3 p.m. All about Bitcoin. Lots of great stuff on CoinDesk.com. Till and after then, check it out. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.